How do we create societies and systems that will ultimately serve us in the way that we want? And these big questions are, how do we do that? How do we create a system that's balanced, in freedom and fairness, with transparency and fairness, so that we can trust that system, that honors minority and majority rights, that separates powers, so that we don't have systems that become captured. But when you build those sorts of systems, who guards the guards? Who watches the watchers? This is one of the benefits that decentralized systems hopefully can solve. So I want to take us back in time a little bit to some of the times that questions like this were being asked, because I think we live in a very similar moment in time as what happened in these instances. So in the United States, our nation's founding fathers sought to establish frameworks which would support a fair government and a sustainable society in the new world that we can create now. So going back to 1215, the Magna Carta, King John was creating laws, but not abiding by his own laws. He felt he was above his law, and he was not acting in a way that was appropriate. And people started to become upset, enough to the point that 25 of his most powerful barons got together and said, no, we won't take this anymore. And they forced King John to sign this Magna Carta in the year 1215 that made him abide by his own laws. The king was not above the law. And the key points in this area were due process of rule of law. And these are critical things that have shaped the society and the world in which we live today. That no free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any other way except by the law of the land. And the king would also have to abide by these rules. Trial by a jury of peers. That it wasn't going to be a rigged system. That you would be judged by other people. That lawful judgment of an accused man's, that you had equal sort of judgment. Not that it's perfect or fair, but it was a lot better than the system that existed prior to that. Right to a speedy trial, so that you wouldn't spend the rest of your life in jail waiting for that judgment to be passed. That to no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay the right or justice. These were very important things that have shaped the society in which we live. I was going to talk a little bit about gunpowder plot, but we'll skip over that to the U.S. Constitution. The three main functions of the Constitution were to have those separations of power. The division of the federal and state powers, and the protection of personal liberty. And these are things that we should all become acquainted with. These are things we all should become familiar with, because a lot of the things that we're doing here are the next evolution of these systems. I like to touch on the Federalist Papers, which were written by three founding fathers, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. But the interesting thing, it was done under a pseudonym. They all collectively wrote these papers and released them under a pseudonym. Reminds me a little bit of the way that things have been done today in the context of Satoshi. And so they did this under the Publius. And there were 77 initial Federalist Papers created and ended with 85. But I want to focus on number 10, which warns about the power of fractions and competing interests over the United States government, and suggests that governments need to pass laws for the common good versus the interest of any one specific group. It proposes a democratic republic in which the majority elects qualified statesmen to represent their interests. Creating a system where we can have good decision making. We put in place stewards that are hopefully acting in our interests, and avoiding a system that can be captured. This was the fear that our founding fathers had. The same sort of things when we're building blockchains and we're looking at attack vectors that we're trying to solve for. How do we avoid systems being captured? And we should study the past so that we don't repeat the mistakes that have been made by them. And then number 51 proposes a government broken into three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial, that keeps checks and balances on each other, which is why we need these separations and division of power. Let's take us into kind of